Hello, dear students and esteemed learners. Welcome to my course on Sociology of Health. This is lecture number 27, and today we will talk about the Millennium Development Goals, its background, the goals, and the health targets. In this week, we are trying to cover the Millennium Development Goal and Sustainable Development Goal and the health goals and the achievements. In the previous lecture, we tried to understand development and different models of development or different paradigms of development. There we talked about economic growth and economic development, then social development, human development, and also sustainable development. And there we stated that development is very broad, then growth. Development takes into consideration the increase in the quantitative as well as quality part, and at the same time development talks about specific goals and targets, because the targets and goals can vary from group to group or context to context. In the social development model, we talked about the benefits of the economic development or economic growth, but at the same time the problems which were caused because of inequalities. So the social development model talks about minimizing the inequalities, right? That means social development is economic development plus minimization of the inequalities or removal of the inequalities. Then we talked about the human development approach. Human development approach categorically stated that there are three core components in development, and these three core components are income, education, and health. Because without these three core components, the individuals are not in a position to use his or her capacities in an appropriate way. They cannot live the kind of life that they value. So human development is very important. Now, what was very new about this human development approach was inclusion of the health related goals or inclusion of health as a parameter of development. Because prior to that, we have been talking about economy as the only parameter of development. So that way, the concept of human development made an advancement. And then it was also supported by basically one human development index, which is a kind of effort to measure development in quantitative terms, right? So human development index talked about three indexes, that is health index, education index, and income index, and then the cumulative result would be in the form of the human development index. So with that, a very new situation emerged, and that was basically in terms of talking about health of people or health attainment of people at a larger level, at the societal level. Now, one very important thing which happened was basically the grading of the various countries in terms of the HDI or Human Development Index, and that helped the various member states to know where they are actually located. So most of the developing countries or underdeveloped countries were actually performing poorly in terms of health index, and because of that their performance in the human development index was poor. So it became an important priority for those countries to make an improvement in the health index, and that is why health came into the focus of the development trajectory. So this is how the background of Millennium Development Goals could be understood, and that is why I have included the term background and goal and health targets, right? So let us go to the first slide. Now, how did we reach to the stage where we try to include health in the trajectory of development or in the paradigm of development? Now, that is very important, and for that, we need to understand two, three important things. First is Alma Ata Declaration. Basically, WHO, World Health Organization, and UNICEF had an international conference at Alma Ata in Russia, then Russia, in the year 1978, and there they talked about three very important things. First was to adopt the primary health care approach. Second was to have the target of health for all. And third was basically a timeline for that. The target of health for all was to be achieved by the 2000, right? So way back in 1978, the Alma Ata Declaration of WHO and UNICEF made very important declaration and categorically stated that health for all should be the goal of the humanity. So this is how health, and primarily health for all, became a very kind of a dominant discourse in the political as well as social milieu at global level. And then a very important development took place after that in the form of ICPD conference, that is the International Conference on Population and Development, that was held in Cairo in 1994. Now, before talking about this Cairo conference, let me tell you that that was a time when the world was witnessing another kind of pandemic that is known as HIV/AIDS pandemic, right? You all might have heard about HIV/AIDS, that is human immunovirus, and it was actually getting transmitted sexually, right? And then there were other modes of transmission also, like genetic or injections, but primarily sexual transmission was there. So because of the sexual transmission of HIV, and which was a kind of pandemic, and that has created fear and threat at global level, there was a need to address the problem of spread of HIV. And for that, it was categorically stated at that point of time that prevention is the only mechanism, right? And for that, the contraceptives were prescribed, right? So there were so many discourses which were prevailing in terms of HIV/AIDS also at that point of time. So that is an important thing when we talk about this ICPD conference. Now let me talk about this ICPD conference. It adopted the program of action by consensus which emphasized the fundamental role of women's interest in population matters and introduced the concept of sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights. So this ICPD conference is very important because it talked almost for the first time on issues, right, like the sexual and reproductive health and the reproductive right. So ICPD is known for the discussion on the reproductive health and the reproductive right. But along with that, it also talked about the sexual health and sexual rights. And as we just talked about, the HIV and AIDS problem was also in the background of having that kind of understanding. So we talked about basically two important milestones here. One, the Alma Ata Declaration, and the second, the ICPD conference, which talked about the reproductive health of women and reproductive rights, and along with that, the sexual health and sexual rights also. Then primarily it was realized that all these things are related with the target of or the goal of empowerment of women, because if women is not empowered, then their reproductive rights or reproductive health could not be taken care of. So health was seen in the context of power or empowerment. So new discourses were actually coming into existence. Then two other things also happened. One is the Human Development Index, and the other is liberalization, privatization, and globalization that the world witnessed in the 1990s. So human development, we talked about that it was a new approach and it included the health related outcome, right? The health outcome of people, and that was basically expressed in terms of the life expectancy. So this was third important component, and the fourth one is again very important in terms of the political economy of the situation, that by the end of the 1980s there was disintegration of USSR, and we all know that after that the world became unipolar, because the communist challenge to the capitalist uh, lobby was no more there, and so the world primarily got dominated by the ideology which were propagated by capitalism at that point of time. And simultaneously there were the ICT revolution, which were paving the path of the communication revolution. So the world was witnessing some kind of globalization. But this globalization was also accompanied by two other processes, which were liberalization and privatization. And these are very important. Now, privatization was very important because in the 90s there were so many developing countries which were having weak performance economically, including India, and they needed some kind of aid or support from the global agencies. And as we know, United Nations is basically one of the most important agency, then International Monetary Fund, World Bank, etc., right? So those global agencies guided these developing countries, and of course other countries also, to ensure that development should take place in such a way that it could be broad based, and where it can have the possibility of recovering from the economic problems that they were witnessing, so that they can return or refund the loans that they are taking from the global agencies. And for that basically privatization and liberalization were all suggested. So these were the long stories. I'm talking about those things very briefly, right, just to make you understand that what developments were there which were running in the background. And because of the so many things, the Millennium Development Goals actually came into existence. Now, let me tell you one more thing. When there was a new thirst towards privatization and globalization and liberalization, then of course it was realized by the global agencies that if the nation states are moving in this direction, then there are certain essential functions which need to be taken care of, and the states should focus on those things, because the state, instead of doing all production works, should focus on regulation and then providing the essential things, right? So when the need of providing those essential things was realized, then the global community identified good number of goals, and precisely speaking 8 goals, and those goals were identified as the Millennium Development Goals. So now we reach to this level of Millennium Development Goals. In September 2000, the largest ever gathering of heads of state ushered in the new millennium by adopting the United Nations Millennium Declaration. The declaration, endorsed by 189 countries, was then translated into a roadmap setting out goals to be reached by 2050. So that was the turn of the millennium, and so these goals were named after that millennium. So this is a millennium and then development goals, right? Now what is very interesting here is this, that these development goals for the first time included many of the health related goals. And why this happened? Because of the things that we just talked about, because of the Alma Ata Declaration, because of the coming into existence of the Human Development Approach, because of the Human Development Index, and because of the ICPD conference, because of the serious threat to health, because of the ongoing pandemic related to HIV/AIDS. All those things were in the background, right? The goals are common for developed and developing parts of the world. Now, when we are talking about Millennium Development Goal and we are saying that there are 8 goals, then it is very interesting that these 8 goals are common for all developed and developing countries. It signifies the commonality of human needs and priorities. However, having common goals doesn't mean that they were having the similar targets. We have already talked about that development means specific, well-defined goals and targets. So the goals were identified in such a way and the targets were identified in such a way that the qualitative as well as the quantitative requirements of the development trajectory should be fulfilled. So the targets are relative, but every state has objectively identifiable targets, as we will see soon. There were 8 goals, and 3 out of 8 goals, 8 of the 16 targets and 18 of the 48 indicators relate directly to the concept of health. Health is also an important contributor to several other goals, right? So soon we will see all those 8 goals, and then we will talk about, here I have mentioned these goals, right? So we will see that out of the 8 goals, 3 are categorically related to health, and then 2 others are also related with the need of health, right? That means the Millennium Development Goals focus a lot on health, and then on education and income, and then some of the other necessary things like sustainability and global partnership and empowerment. Then we need to understand the indicators also. Indicators are very important because common indicators help in developing global framework and standards. No country can ignore these common indicators. So for measuring those development or those goals, there were certain indicators, and these indicators were can be easily defined and identified even at numerical level. The significance of the MDGs lies in the linkages between them, right? Now 8 goals are there. We can talk about each of these goals individually, but we will get to know, we will see that these are actually inseparable from each other. If you want to make development at a comprehensive level, if you want to achieve development at a comprehensive level, then we need to talk about, we need to understand the multidimensionality of development, something that we talked about in the previous lecture also. And these set of 8 goals basically help us to understand the multidimensionality. Here are the goals. We'll talk about first the all 8 goals, and then we will identify the goals which are related to human development approach, and then primarily we will focus on the health related goals. So the first goal is talking about eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. Despite so many decades of having the United Nations the world was witnessing extreme problems of poverty and hunger. And so the first goal categorically talks about eradication of extreme poverty and hunger. The second goal talks about achieve universal primary education. We already talked about education. So the focus here is on primary education. Now it would be interesting to know that there is a general agreement that primary education should be taken care of by the state, because the higher education is something which is related with the problems of affordability, right? So it may vary from person to person, from family to family, as per their choice. But for primary education, this should not be a choice, but it should be a kind of mandatory thing, and the state should take the responsibility of providing primary education. So achieve universal primary education. Then third important goal is promote gender equality and empower women. We just talked about the ICPD conference, and so if you want to take care of the reproductive needs of women, we will see that the problems of maternal mortality and infant mortality are related with the problem of reproductive health, right? And that is again related with the empowerment of women, right? So this third goal, gender and equality and empowerment of women. Then we come to the fourth goal, that is reduce child mortality. Very specifically and very straightforward words, it is stated that reduce child mortality. Then goal number 5 talks about improve maternal health, right? So not only talking about reproductive health, but talking about maternal health, which takes into consideration the reproductive health as well as the health of the women during the entire maternity span, right? Then it talks about combat HIV/AIDS, malaria, and other diseases, right? So we just talked about the onslaught of HIV/AIDS, and we stated that how this played an important role in the articulation of the Millennium Development Goals. But was that the only problem that the humanity was witnessing? And the answer is no, it was not the only health problem. There were other health problems that we have been talking about, right? So malaria was again a big killer, and along with that there were several other communicable diseases, right? Several communicable diseases related to respiration, the respiratory organs, right? And these were actually killer not only during the early childhood but also in all stages of life, right? So this goal number 6 is talking about combat HIV/AIDS, malaria, and other diseases. Then goal number 7, ensure environmental sustainability. Now we talked about sustainable development, and that is why we talked about sustainable development earlier, right? So there are two things which are mentioned here. One is the environment and second is the sustainability, right? And basically we know that these two things are interconnected, because we cannot achieve sustainability without taking care of the environmental aspects of development, right? So this is a very important area which needed our focus, right? Because in the trajectory of economic growth during the phases of industrialization, very mindlessly the nation states exploited the natural resources, the deforestations, then the desettlements, and then exploitation of the natural resources in terms of having the mining and whatnot else, right? The rapid expansion of urbanization, urban facility, all these things are actually endangering the existence of the species in this planet Earth, and also some way endangering the existence of the planet itself, right? So there are very important there is a very important need to take care of the environmental sustainability, and so that is goal number 7. And finally, this is goal number 8: develop a global partnership for development. Because if there are so many goals which are identified, then how the nation states can achieve all these goals? Because here is the need of fund and finance, and then several other things like the expertise also, right? And of course we know that for the growth of a nation state there is need of different types of resources. So for this goal is talking about that there is a need of having a global partnership for development, and so there are specific targets and then indicators. I have not included all the targets and all the indicators because those are huge. Our basic purpose here is to understand the health related targets, and this is what I have mentioned in the topic also, right? However, we talked about all the 8 goals because these are all interrelated, and that is why we had discussed the concept of the different types of development also. Now let us talk about the targets, some of the targets and indicators related to the health related goals, because time will allow us to talk about that only. Now we stated that there are 3 goals which are categorically related to health, and these are goal number 4, 5 and 6. So I have highlighted 2 other goals in green, which are basically eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, goal number 1, and then promote gender equality and empower women, goal number 3. Now these 2 are also very much related with the health related goals. So although there are 3 direct goals related to health, but there are 2 other goals which are indirectly related with the health issues, right? Because hunger is something which is endangering life. We talked about hunger and food in one of the previous lectures, and then empowerment of women and gender equality is again very important because that is related to the reproduction of women, the reproductive health of the women, along with the existence of women as individual citizens. So all development targets, the women are equal stakeholder, but along with that there is an additional responsibility that they are associated with, and that is related to the reproductive rights, right? So these are the comprehensive things that we need to talk about when we are trying to understand the Millennium Development Goals. Now let us have a look on the specific targets related to the health goals. So have a look on goal number 4, reduce child mortality, and the target here is reduce by 2/3 between 1990 and 2015 the under 5 mortality rate. Now here we will try to understand the target. It says that reduce by 2/3 between 1990 and 2015. That means although the target is common, but the implication will be specific for every country. Why? Because it is not giving a specific number. It says that reduce by 2/3. So whichever numbers were existing in 1990, now those numbers should be reduced by 2/3 by 2015. That means every country, depending upon the kind of prevalence rate they were having, they can achieve their own targets. And then the indicators for this particular target and goal are under 5 mortality rate, infant mortality rate, proportion of 1-year-old children immunized against measles, right? So these are related to mortality and then vaccination, very objectively identifiable indicators as well as target. Then goal number 6, before that I need to talk about goal number 5, and the goal is improve maternal health, and the target is reduce by 3/4 between 1990 and 2015 the maternal mortality ratio. So whatever was the prevalence of maternal mortality along 1990 that basically need to be reduced by 3/4. And the indicators are again the maternal mortality ratio, then proportion of birth attended by skilled health personnel, because one of the important causes of maternal mortality is that birth is not attended by the skilled health personnel. Very often the childbirth is taking place the home, and that is basically an important cause of maternal mortality. So institutional delivery was suggested, but the indicator is like this. And then come and here we go for the goal number 6, that is combat HIV AIDS, malaria and other disease. And here we have two specific targets: have halted by 2015 and begun to reverse the spread of HIV AIDS. That means by 2015 the growth or the spread or the expansion should come to an end, and then the reverse, that means the reduction in the number of persons who are affected by this. That means the target is to control HIV AIDS by 2015. And the other target is have halted by 2015 and begun to reverse the indicator of malaria and other major disease. Right? That means whether it is HIV AIDS or malaria or other communicable disease, those should be halted by 2015. That was the target, and then reverse the process by after that. So these were the targets, and if you want to see the indicators, then these are like HIV prevalence among pregnant women aged 15 to 24 years, then condom use over rate of the contraceptive prevalence and others, and then prevalence and death rate associated with malaria. So these are such specific indicators which can be expressed quantitatively, and so that there can be a comparison not only among the countries but within a country between specific periods of time. So these were the specific health related goals of the Millennium Development Goals and the specific targets and indicators. We talked about these things at length today and also tried to understand the background in which the MDGs came into existence. In the next class, we'll talk about the specific achievements for these health related targets. So till then, take care.